panel discussion at the second edition of ELIT's Hospital Infrastructure Summit. This panel discussion is on the year ahead design trends. So let's welcome our eminent panelists. Please join your hands together for Dr. Chandrika Kambam. She is Director for Clinical Services at Healthcare Global Enterprises Limited. Also, please welcome Mr. Namit Soni, Director and CEO, Sony Hospitals. I also have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Saurav Lal, who is Head of Hospital Operations at Max Healthcare. Dr. Lal will also be moderating this panel discussion. Next is Mr. Shamit Manchanda, Chief Healthcare Architect at Manchanda Associates. Welcome, Mr. Shamit. Next is Mr. Dibyajyoti Dr. Roy, owner at RJB Architects. Welcome, Mr. Dr. Roy. I would now like to go across to Dr. Lal for moderating this panel discussion. Dr. Lal, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind words and the warm welcome. So, I will quickly and directly jump onto the topic, which today is the year ahead design trends. So, essentially, design is, by definition, the process and skill of planning how something should be made and how it will function in the best possible way or the most optimized way. Also, a second perspective to design is design thinking. So, by definition, it is the term that we use to represent a set of cognitive, strategic, and practical processes in which design concepts are developed. In today's time, I think, especially in healthcare, the concept of design and design thinking is absolutely essential because we have kind of hit a very sharp curve in the industry, and we have reached a stage where survival of the fittest is the only way ahead. And when I say survival, I would request that to be read as innovation rather than survival. So, innovation and out of the box ideas are the key to future healthcare, and out of the box ideas are not executable till the time they are scalable, sustainable, and replicable. So, with that thought, I think I will move on to Mr. Shamit Machanda. Thanks a lot. I think we've spoken about a lot of different dimensions of design trends, but one area which is probably an area that we most commonly miss out on, or rather overlook or underplay, is the concept of marrying processes to the infrastructure. So what I in principle mean is that we all know that there is a green channel that is required in hospitals these days. But how many of us plan an express check-in channel in a hospital? Not many. Many of us try to retrofit it, but when we are fundamentally planning a hospital or a healthcare organization, these things get overlooked, and the concept of taking the hospital closer to the patient becomes even more precious, and it's more symbolic than brick and mortar. It is basically the concept of not just bringing the hospital close to the patient physically, but also bringing the hospital close to the patient in principle, in process. So with that, I get a very interesting example in my mind. And since I hail from Delhi, there is a very popular concept of the British era in Delhi NCR, the Delhi National Capital Region, which is the Cobra effect. So what used to happen back in the British times are that Delhi used to be majorly surrounded by a forest. The walled city used to be surrounded by a forest, and these forests had a lot of cobras in them. So a process was set in by the British government after they moved their capital to Delhi, and they said that whoever brings us a cobra head will get a gold coin. They used to call it an asharfi. It's a gold coin. So they thought that it's a process which will, reduce the number of cobras and make that area safer for development and travel, etc. Over a period of time, the Britishers realized that the number of cobra heads coming to them kept on increasing on a regular basis. So they got confused. They said that, initially we would say get an X number of cobra heads, and we would be very happy that, X cobras are now lesser into the system. But over a period of time, they started getting 2X cobra heads, and then 5X, and then 10X cobra heads. So some intelligent Britisher went into the system to identify what the problem was. And he realized that the Indians were actually rearing cobras in their homes, cutting their heads off, and taking them to the government to get the gold coins. So such is process excellence, that you may come up with a process, you may try to retrofit a process, you may feel that the process works absolutely well because on paper and theory it is the best thing you could have done. But in principle, whether the process marries to the infrastructure, marries to the people, marries to the, marries itself to the general ecosystem is extremely important. And that is where comes the role of quality. These days quality is not just an accreditation team. There was a time in healthcare, and Dr. Chandrika would agree with me, she's been part of the medical services for long enough, wherein the quality team was looked at a team which would come into play at the time of an NABH inspection or a JCI inspection. After the inspection gets cleared, they get their bonuses, and then nobody cares about them. So that is gone, are those days. Now quality is such a fundamental process in hospitals that quality teams eventually become teams which open up a lot of channels for revenue, EBITDA, profitability, etc. And that's how the specialty or that discipline has evolved over these few years. So I'm going to come to Namit on this, but technically marketing communication. So many a times what happens is that we may have a lot of good processes, a lot of good infrastructure initiatives, a lot of good, I would say, innovative out of the box ideas that we have executed in our hospitals. But most of the times, what healthcare in principle fails at is to effectively communicate that to the patient or the person on the other side of the table. And that is when the merit of a fantastic idea gets diluted. And unfortunately, that's something which we see very commonly in the healthcare space. So I'm going to come back to Namit Soni, who's the director and CEO of Soni Hospitals, on these two very, very fundamental aspects. And I request him to take them up separately, and then eventually, kind of just enlighten the audience on how quality and marketing communication go hand in hand. Because now quality is no longer a specialty which was focused at one particular actionable, and marketing communication is not putting up boards in the hospital and elsewhere. It's much more than that. Namit, over to you. That was quite enlightening. Also, we've I think touched on almost all aspects of design. But as a doctor turned management professional, I think design is something which has been very, very close to my heart. And I've kind of ensured that there was no stone unturned ever where a design could improve. So I strongly believe there is no perfect design, but then as healthcare professionals, the expectation of the patient is that we are as close to perfection as it may be. And that makes it extremely important that we understand how important it is to set the expectations of the patient. So a very common practice of hospitals across the country on experience of the patient focuses majorly at the medical aspects. But then I keep giving this example to my teams that if we look at the general life cycle of a patient in the hospital, we can divide it into three parts. One is the first part, which is the pre-surgery experience. The second is the actual surgical experience. This is the core experience which the patient is coming to the hospital for. So if I need a cardiac surgery, I will choose the best hospital, I will choose the best doctor, and I will go in for the surgery. But the second aspect is being the core, also has a third aspect, which is the post surgery experience. Now I always keep telling my teams that When a patient comes to a hospital, he enters the hospital, first struggles for a parking slot, gets a parking slot, goes on to the front office, the IT systems are down. I'm giving a generic example. That causes a lot of delay to his admission. Then he moves into a room, the call bell not working, infrastructure issues with the washrooms, etc., etc. So this comes into the pre-surgical phase of any patient. Now comes the second phase, which is the surgical phase, and this is the core phase for which the patient has come to the hospital. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, when the patient moves into the second phase, which apparently is the main reason why a patient has come to the hospital, we doctors anesthetize the patient and the patient goes to sleep. The family is outside, they don't know what is happening inside till the time the doctor comes out and tells them. If the patient survives, obviously the surgery went well. But technically, this phase, which was the main phase of why a patient comes to a hospital, is when the patient is actually asleep. There is a term in the OT used as timeout. Timeout means when the patient knocks off. So, and then the patient goes into the post-surgical phase, which is the discharge process, which is whether the discharge desk is on the same floor or the patient has to run around across the hospital, whether there is an express checkout process for cash and insurance patients, whether there is a hand-holding desk or a may I help you desk on every floor. So, when we look at the end-to-end patient experience, it is the overall experience, not necessarily whether the surgeon did a fantastic job at the surgery or not. And that is what we, as leaders in the healthcare space, need to understand, that patient expectation setting is extremely important. Another example that comes to my mind is that there was a patient who came to our hospital for a very major, complex, high risk cardiac surgery, neurosurgery. The patient was refused by all major hospitals of the city, and he landed up to Max. We operated him, and fortunately, we could save the patient's life. Now we went to meet this patient post surgery, and this was a patient which was actually a published case, and we were very proud of saving the life of such a high risk surgery patient. And the first thing the patient said is that, sir, आपके doctors बहुत अच्छे हैं, hospital is fantastic, but एक problem है. आपका जो खाना कस्टर्ड आता है ना सर, उसकी जो ट्रॉली है उसमें बहुत आवाज आती है. I can't sleep because the whole night the F&B trolleys are doing the rounds of the corridor. Now, this is a patient who probably would not have been alive to have that custard. But the expectation was that surgery to kar hi lenge. They are doctors, they know their job, it's a good hospital. So surgery to inke bas ki hai, kar lenge, but custard bhi serve karna nahi aata dhang se. So, that is the level of expectation of patients today. And this reiterates what I believe, that, there may be no perfect design, but healthcare has very limited scope of making errors. It may be clinical, it may be non-clinical. What the patient understands is non-clinical. Patient doesn't understand clinical stuff. And hence, towards the culmination, I will not pull this too far, but towards the culmination, I personally believe that there is no crash course to design. But the fact is, nor will any such session make us design champions overnight. What sessions like this, what discussions like this will do is, it will plant that seed of inception for innovation and out of the box thinking, where somebody somewhere somehow will suddenly realize that what I'm doing for the last 10 years, 15 years is not the way to do it right. We were sitting in a discussion in our hospital once, and somebody from our leadership team came up and said that, what do you do in an admission process? We said, sir, the patient comes in, he fills a form, then my guy takes the form, replicates it to the computer, the IT system's not working well, so it takes time, etc., etc. And he suddenly snapped back and said that, why are you not learning from the airlines industry? There is something called as a web check-in for airlines. And we were like, exactly, why didn't we even think of it? So what the web check-in does is, it allows the passenger to fill out all these details while the person is sitting in the drawing room of his house. So we as a hospital have started working towards figuring out if we can have the patient sit in his house. See, the admission process, the bed management process will take 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever it takes. But the option there is whether the patient sits in a cafeteria in the hospital or the comfort of his or her home. And that is where we realize that, why can't we have a system where the patient fills in his details at home and sends it to us, comes to the hospital only when we give him a green signal that your bed is ready, please come, take your face sheet and go into your room. So that is the innovation and out of the box process that is kind of required today. And I think, all of us are working very aggressively towards it. There is this concept of no touch no paper mechanism that has come in suddenly in our lives, which we have grown up alienated to, because we never believed. I mean, till the time, I still remember, till the time we didn't touch and feel things, we would not believe it is true. But today we are looking at processes where, there is no or minimal transfer of, materials, papers, etc., etc. And hence design becomes more and more important, and design thinking comes into play when we are able to kind of, bring in things that never existed in this industry. And I think that is where the healthcare industry is heading. And I think this is the next step. This is the new path that healthcare professionals like us need to take, and ensure that our hospitals become smarter and not just hardworking places of healthcare. Thank you so much. That's all from me. Thank you to all the speakers, Dr. Chandrika, Shamit, Mr. Roy, and Namit. I think that was a fantastic discussion. I'm sure the speakers must have, I'm sure the audience must have gathered some small little points. The 80-20 rule exists here, where people will probably forget 80%, but if they remember 20% of what we've done here, I think we are home. So thank you so much. I will pass this on to Mrinmoy. And
Thank you,
Thank
Dr. Thank you, Dr. Saurav Lal, for participating here.